Okay, welcome back to our video lectures here for Chem 161. This is part 2 of our discussion on classes and properties of matter. All right, so part 2. Last time we talked about heterogeneous and homogeneous mixtures and how we saw elements and compounds drop out of that. So let's start here with a more general definition here for just what is matter. So the definition for what matter is it is anything that has mass and occupies space. So you have mass and occupies space, so you are matter. A proton within the nucleus of an atom has mass and occupies space, and that is matter. Very good. Second, we'd like a way to describe matter based on observations and measurements. These observations and measurements are what allow us to describe properties. So the properties of matter are a way to describe matter based on observations and measurements. Very good. So these properties can be further divided into two different types of properties. Okay, so these two types of properties are going to be called an intensive property and an intensive property is something that is a property that's independent of the amount of substance that's present. Okay, so let's just note that here. Independent of the amount present. Take a minute to think about what properties that you might know of that might be intensive. Yeah, so maybe you were thinking things like color. If I had 1 gram of material, it might and should have the same color as 100 grams or a kilogram or a ton of that same material. Same would go for odor or the smell of a compound, or even the density of a compound, something we haven't touched on yet, but we will. This can be contrasted to another type of property, which is called the extensive property. So extensive properties are going to be the complement to an intensive one. So we're going to expect these should be dependent on the amount of the substance in question. Again, take a minute here to think about what extensive properties you think might be dependent on the amount of substance. So hopefully you were thinking about things like the mass, the property of mass, should depend on how much we have in question. The length, of course, should depend on how much we've got. Volume, even number of particles, and we'll see in this course that a good unit to describe that is going to be the moles of those particles. We'll see that later in our course. Excellent. Okay. Now let's further classify some additional properties as being either physical or chemical. So let's talk about physical properties. Okay, so physical properties can be measured or observed without changing the substance. Okay. Without changing the substance. So take a minute to think about what physical properties you can think of that you could determine without actually changing the nature of that material. Yeah, so for the most part, the temperature of a material doesn't change until extreme conditions. Doesn't change that material. The boiling point of a material, the density, again, are examples of physical properties of material. The physical property for the boiling point, for example, might have, for water, might be 212 degrees Fahrenheit or 100 degrees Celsius. And the water before and after that boiling condition still has the same connectivity between the atoms. Okay, let's contrast that over now to chemical properties. So chemical properties consist of properties that describe how a substance will react. And this will trigger a change of that material into a new substance or with its own set of new properties. Okay, so here this is going to describe how a substance will react and the substance will change into a new substance from this chemical property. So take a minute to think about what chemical property might lead to a chemical change and create a new one, and what this would be for a certain type of material. So maybe you were thinking examples like the burning or the oxidation of combustible material, the flammability of that material, etc. These are some examples. Okay, we'll stop there and we'll continue with the next video, continuing on Chapter 1 content.